Welcome to Showboat, a series of podcasts from the Battleship North Carolina in Wilmington. I'm your host, Mary Ames Booker, ship's curator. Together we'll discover the stories of an extraordinary ship that steamed into history, what makes her tick and keeps her going, and her vital contributions today. Join us as we share her adventures and celebrate the thousands of men who served on the most highly decorated American battleship of World War II. As the colors rose over the stern on Wednesday morning, April 9, 1941, the band played the Star-Spangled Banner, and the Battleship North Carolina began her service in the U.S. Navy on Commission Day. Musicians on ships inspire patriotism, elevate morale, enhance retention, and foster pride in naval service. It's a long tradition. The Showboat's first band members reported aboard in April 1941. There were 19 enlisted men who played clarinet, cornet, alto and tenor sax, trombone, trumpet, organ, and piano. The young men had enlisted in the Navy as musicians, but all did not attend the Navy School of Music in Washington, D.C. The musicians were under the leadership of bandmaster Raymond Anthony Ruther. A trumpet player, Ruther enlisted in the Navy in 1923 and began training at the Navy School of Music in Newport, Rhode Island. It was one of 3 schools for training musicians. The others were in Norfolk, Virginia, and San Diego. Ruther was assigned to several ships, stations, and bases that took him to various places around the world before landing in Brooklyn in April 1941 as the new bandmaster on the North Carolina. The Showboat played daily while the ship was in the Brooklyn Navy Yard in May 1941. They practiced creating their own musical style and wrote a few special arrangements, including the North Carolina March. They formed a 4-man saxophone section and asked the crew for theme song suggestions to identify the orchestra at dances. In August 1941, Ruther ordered sheet music from Carl Fisher in New York City. He bought the standards of Anchors Aweigh, the Marines' Hymn March, and Stars and Stripes, but also hit music such as Apple Blossom Time, sung by the Andrews Sisters, The Wise Old Owl, which was number 1 on the hit parade, I Hear a Rhapsody, played by Jimmy Dorsey and his orchestra, and 17 books of American swing band music. The Showboat Band wanted to play the crew's favorite numbers. The band accompanied the Showboat as she headed to the Pacific in early summer 1942. Men crowded on the main deck every afternoon to hear the concerts. Their splendid work made long periods at sea more pleasant, reported the ship's newsletter. The swinging, jumping jives section featuring 5 musicians played in the shade of turret number 3 in the evenings. The band's routine, as set by the ship's organization and regulations, included playing for a physical drill at 0800 and 1300. Years later, musician Don Wickham recalled,
"Every once in a while, we would get some young officer who's going to shape these guys up. You would go through your little stretches and bends. They figured the crew would do it better to music. By playing for the physical drill, we didn't have to endure it ourselves. So that was all right."
The band had rehearsal and/or individual practice from 9 to noon and 2 to 3:30, a concert at noon, and another 8:30 to 9:30 on alternate nights for the crew and officers. Friday and Saturday were left open. When the ship was in port, they played colors each morning. And they were always ready to play honors on the quarterdeck if requested. look at how the Navy's musician rate came into existence. The Navy's 6 original frigates had drum and fife players, but the rate wasn't established until 1838, when 6 men were paid to form a ship's band. That didn't change until the American Civil War, when a Navy band grew to a proper 20-man complement. Interestingly, European musicians often formed most ships' bands, even into the 20th century, but many enlisted only to get passage to America and then deserted for more lucrative musical careers. It took World War I for the Navy to develop an organized band structure. Experienced musicians from symphonies, college, and civic bands enlisted in the Navy. John Philip Sousa was recruited to be in charge of the music program at the Great Lakes, Illinois Naval Station and given the rank of lieutenant commander. He formed a battalion of 350 musicians, and they played across the country for Liberty Loan drives. And he formed regimental bands that could be called to a ship or station. These were organized groups of musicians who understood how to play together, and that is key. In 1935, Lieutenant Charles Benter, leader of the U.S. Navy Band, established a music school that would adequately train and assign musicians for duty in the fleet. The Navy School of Music opened in the Washington Navy Yard. In California, 18-year-old Lloyd Glick decided to join the Navy days after the attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941. He was an accomplished trumpet player and knew about the prestigious U.S. Navy School of Music in Washington, D.C. He went to the Navy recruiting office in San Francisco to ask about auditioning. He was told they'd call him when a slot was open at the training facility in San Diego. He waited 4 months, until finally on April 24, 1942, Lloyd was in the Navy. He describes his experience enlisting in the Navy and attending the School of Music.
When I enlisted and told them I wanted to go to the School of Music, they reminded me that that school lasted for at least a year, and they weren't going to let me go to the school unless I would sign for a regular 6-year hitch, not as a reserve, but as a regular. So what does an 18-year-old kid know? I signed the paper for 6 years, and I had to do it all, even though the war ended. When I first got there, the School of Music was located in the Navy Yard in Washington, in that portion which constitutes the gun factory. And we had a barracks building just inside the side gate to the Navy Yard. And then across from that building was the gun factory building. I don't think they manufactured or made, but I think they repaired and rebored the rifling on the 16-inch guns. That was the main function of that particular building. And the School of Music was located on the 3rd floor of that building. So in the mornings after chow, we'd go to that building and walk past all these rows upon rows of 16-inch barrels and climb a metal ladder up 3 floors to what was then the School of Music. It was rather small. The school was not as large as it later became, and there were fewer students. But our schooling there consisted of classes in musical theory and a little bit of training on the military aspect of Navy bands. But mostly we practiced individually, practiced as groups, and they would send dance bands out from the School of Music to the USOs around Washington and down as far as Baltimore. So it was school in the morning with theory and musical training. In the afternoon, it was rehearsals with various bands, like a swing band or a concert band. And then in the evening, it would be out playing USO jobs. If we did not have an outside dance to play in the evening, of course, we were free to go about the town. Maybe 6 months after I got back there, the School of Music started to enlarge as more and more people were recruited as musicians. So the Navy acquired some property in Anacostia, which is just across the river from the Navy Yard, and they built a new facility, School of Music. So the School of Music moved across the river to Anacostia. Our activities in the school were pretty much the same as they had been in the Navy Yard.
I spoke with Commander Mark Corbliss, Commanding Officer, Navy School of Music, to learn about training musicians today.
Well, I am Commander Mark Corbliss. I am the commanding officer of the School of Music. We train with the Army, but not the same program, but we also train the Marines with us. So we are the Naval School of Music. We train Marines and sailors right now. The Army School of Music trains soldiers in a different cadre, in a different pace. It's 0 or 60 miles an hour with the Army. So, and they have a good number more reserve bands and guard bands. So they train them all the same, about 10 weeks in their course. The start of this school, it was a naval school at first, and it was pretty much traced back to the early 1900s, and it started in like fits and spurts. They really didn't get to it till about 1935, and then they finally had a formal school of music that opened in Washington, D.C., and they kind of trained alongside the United States Navy Band. And so that kept going with just sailors until 1942, and then they started to do it on their own. So how it would work back then is that students would class up, and they would form a band, a unit band, and they would train together, and you got to hope they liked each other. They would train together, and the original course was 2 years, and they would train together, and they would graduate together, and they would go to their ship together. So that's what all the battleships had their own bands, and that's why they were just called unit band this and unit band that. And so that's how it started. And then later, we picked up about a decade after this started in 1942, about 1952, we picked up about 15 Marines. And then we started to negotiate with the Army. And in 1951, Army students started coming to the Naval School of Music, or the Navy School of Music, it was called back then. So it originated as a Naval School of Music, and the Navy kind of had hold of it, and the Army trained with us. We were a tri-service school. And then about 10, 12 years ago, the Army split off. We eventually moved down here to Little Creek, and we moved into a building that was built in 1955, so it was less than optimal, but they stripped it down, and it was basically all the barracks rooms were turned into practice rooms. We named it after the original commanding officer, Commander Captain McDonald, in 2005, and then we basically renovated it top to bottom in 2014, and it is a much more collegiate atmosphere now. The practice rooms are not made of cinder block. They're soundproofed. You can't hear everybody else practicing down the hall, and they're also climate controlled. And a huge addition that came through was we have an annex now. It's a rehearsal annex, because none of our rehearsal spaces were actually proper in their dimensions. The ceilings were very low. It was just none of them were designed for rehearsal. And so with the help of the Army School of Music, which by this point had been separate, we put together the funding, and we built a rehearsal annex, and it is a godsend. It's got 2 large rehearsal areas for like a wind ensemble, and 2 smaller rehearsal areas that you'd use for a brass band or say a rock band. And so we are pretty much our facilities right now are as good as any college facilities out and around the country, especially a liberal arts college. It's a large space. The Army can train 80 at a time. They have a range, maybe 70 to 90 for their cadres. They come 4 times a year, 10 weeks at a time. And on our side, we go from a low end in the summertime of, say, 40 Marines and sailors to, almost 200. And that is pretty much how we do it. We get them ready for the fleet. That's our job. We get them ready to be a fleet musician, and they need to be ready on day one. And that is our mission, to have them ready on day one, and there are no exceptions to that rule.
How long is the course of study?
I find it interesting that I think that when we started the school, we modeled it after the Royal Marine Academy. And the Royal Marine Academy pretty much trains the same way. They have students for 2 years. In this day and age, the Navy would never put up with that because it's just too much money to have a student for 2 years. So that initial course involved advanced course students and basic course students. That means that middle management guy, a little higher in rank, would come back to the school and run these bands. And that was a 2-year course. Now our basic course is 21 weeks, so somewhere over 5 months, between 5 and 6 months. And our advanced courses have gotten, it used to be they were a year each, and now we have gotten our unit leader course, which is our mid-level advanced course, down to under 7 months, and then, under 8 months. And then our very newest advanced course for our senior enlisted is now 13 weeks, because we just asked the question, what do we need our senior enlisted musicians to do? And when we got the answer, this is what we came up with: 13 weeks of instruction to make sure they were going to be good senior enlisted leaders. So that's how it goes. The basic course is 21 weeks, the unit leader course is about 8 months, and the AMC is about 13 weeks.
Commander, please tell us about your students.
We class up, every month we have a class up. And our program is so small, we can literally land people here, with boot camp and timing and everything. We get them here right when the class is starting. So nobody waits for a class in the Navy. The Marines are different. They come in kind of droves, they come in small groups from different parts of the country. But I generally sit down with all the basic students when they come in, and we have an in brief, and I ask people, what they've been doing, and on the Marine side, yes, they tend to go much younger, but we have a doctor in this class, and that's not that unusual. He is a doctor. He's a doctorate in music, and he is a seaman, and he's very happy to have a job. And so that is the reality of the situation. And people generally do not get into the Navy, and it's not a requirement at all to have a degree, but most of the people we hire have a degree. And when I say a degree, it's a bachelor's, but more likely it's a master's. We're small, yeah. So it's terrible to be as small as we are, but it's kind of great to be as small as we are because we get the choice to pick the very, very best that shows up for an audition, and in many cases, that's a guy with a master's in music performance. So the band's quality, the musicians in the bands these days are through the roof. The Marines are also, though, the Marines are they're getting to be much more diverse in there. So the Marines used to be kind of like generally your general broad stroke could be a lot of high school graduates, a lot of young people, never been even away from home and things like that. But that is not, I think that is not, it's not quite the exception yet, but it is about only half the rule. I would say that many of the Marines that we brief are either have some college or all college. They have at least a bachelor's degree. This is a good job. You get to do what you love, and you're serving your country, and there's really nothing bad about it. It's a great job. That's why we retain. People don't quit. We actually now just hire to vacancies. It's a very good job. People don't get out, unless they retire pretty much or higher tenure. And so we have a final manning document, and it has the number of this type of instrument, listed. And when we get low, or we get, to a certain, not even low, we just get below manning, and we advertise for an audition, and we have maybe 2 spots. We hire 2 people, or maybe we don't find them, but it's a great way to go. It's the same as professionals do when they hire for an orchestra. We have what's called a cattle call audition. You all come to Millington, Tennessee. If you want the job, you get there and you try just like everybody else with 30 other people. And so we hire to vacancies, which means we are low on trumpets. We will hire trumpets, and then the trumpets will go to the bands that need trumpets.
Do students give public performances?
Now, performance-wise, we have, over the last 4 or 5 years, set up what we call the capstone program. And so we give the band, and especially with the rock band, we call them PMGs, popular music groups, but with the rock band, we do this. We give them a realistic amount of time to put together a concert. And a concert is pretty much a 40-minute set, right? You would go out and say you're at the county fair and you're warming up for Joan Jett and the Blackhearts, and you're going to do this, and they absolutely do it all the time. And so we give them 4 weeks, and they have to get a show together, and the show has got to be complete with transitions. All the music has got to be memorized, and you got to have patter. You got to have a show that goes from end to end, and there's got to be movement, right? You got to make points of interest on the stage. So the capstone performance is what we would call the real performance in the fleet. And except for the fact that the last year has been a disaster, what we would do, especially with the rock band, is we'd bring in it really helps to have 18 and 19-year-old Marines because they are all about, enthusiasm. So we'll bring in a whole audience to give the energy back to the rock band, and they will do a performance, and we'll make up a scenario like where they are, what this is. We're in the Philippines right now. It's the International Day of Independence for the Philippines, and that's their mission, and they pretend that that's their mission, and they do everything they would do in the fleet. And what's great is when things go wrong. It's so great to see things go wrong and to see how they react, how they're going to do it. This mic doesn't work, hand it off. This is a very fleet relevant exercise. So I would say that the students love the rock band as they would. They play popular music. It's on the radio, but they also love the brass band. And the brass band has become our workhorse for almost every branch. And that's because it's not like a New Orleans brass band. It's like a brass band that can play anything that a rock band can play except unplugged. And that is very advantageous when you're tooling around Africa. It doesn't need electricity, and it's very entertaining. And you just, if you have maybe a battery run amplifier and a microphone for some vocals, you're done. You're in. You got a group. They walk in, they start playing, they walk out. It's great. And you don't need a big stage, and you don't need a bunch of electricity. So those groups are probably the favorite. But we definitely also emphasize traditional wind ensemble here because they will be playing it when they get in the fleet, and that's the stuff that really stands out as knowing your craft. If you're playing these pieces and you're playing them well, then you're going to be fine.
Thank you very much for speaking with us today, Commander. And everyone, please join us later this summer for the Showboat Band Part 2. We'll hear more from Commander Corbliss and head to sea with Lloyd Glick and Band number 35. Thank you for listening to today's episode. I'm Mary Ames Booker, host and producer of the podcast. Showboat is a series of podcasts about the Battleship North Carolina in Wilmington, North Carolina. Visit us online at www.battleshipnc.com. The Showboat welcomes visitors daily. In 2020, the Battleship North Carolina received an NC Cares Humanities Relief Grant from the North Carolina Humanities Council, www.nchumanities.org. Funding for NC Cares has been provided by the National Endowment for the Humanities as part of the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act Economic Stabilization Plan.